Mbeumo injured, Son a potential injury doubt, and I still somehow own Darwin Núñez. This is going to be an interesting Game Week 16 team reveal, but I think I have the answer to all of our FPL problems. Welcome to the FPL Fan Show. As always, make sure to drop a like, smash that subscribe button. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, we need to do a quick Game Week review to see how I got on. It was only yesterday Game Week 15 finish, and the Game Week 16 deadline is tomorrow. You gotta love this festive period. So while it was a really difficult game week, I ended up somehow getting a green arrow. I got 37 points and ended up getting an overall rank of 408,000, which was basically a 30k green arrow, which honestly I am delighted with, especially with how some of the players delivered the game week. So look, Dubravka was my transfer in Game Week 15, the 2-pointer. It looked so good at one point. He actually was on for 3 bonus points, a 10-point haul, and Everton ended up delivering. And honestly, Everton thoroughly deserved that victory. But Dubravka, 2-pointer, I'll take it, considering clean sheets were a bit of a premium in Game Week 15. Defence, just look how awful that is. Guy with the 1-pointer, Saliba with the 1-pointer, and Gabriel with the 1-pointer. It doesn't come much worse than that. All I needed was a red card and it would have completed the set. So safe to say I was disappointed with how my defenders got on in Game Week 15. And looking at the midfielders, these are the ones that saved me realistically. Bryan Mbeumo with that 6-pointer, a goodbye present for my FPL team. Son with the 2-pointer, Palmer with the 8-pointer, Saka 5, and Mo Salah obviously blanking but being my captain. Darwin Núñez, that 20-minute cameo, yellow card, should have got sent off some feel, ended up getting a last-minute assist for that monster 3-point haul, and Erling Haaland with those 2 points. So honestly, I am absolutely buzzing to somehow get a green arrow looking at some of the performances of this team. And of course, we need to address the elephant in the room, that massive red flag for Bryan Mbeumo right now, who is definitely going to be ruled out for Game Week 16 and 17, and of course blanks in Game Week 18. So that is going to be a transfer that is desperate to be made. But it's also worth noting Son limped off in the Spurs game, so that is also a bit of a concern for our FPL team. So look, I'm going to cover off the things that you missed in Game Week 15, and then we're going to get on to my Game Week 16 team reveal. So as I mentioned, I want to cover off 8 things that you may have missed in Game Week 15. It was a midweek. I understand you might have been busy and you might not have caught these things. Some of these might be obvious, but it is worth noting. So first up, Hwang, 5.7 million, scored his 8th goal of the season. Are we completely overlooking this Wolves man? It's worth noting he is one of the most bought players going into Game Week 16, so it looks like the secret of Hwang is finally out and people are selling Mbeumo for him. And I think he's a great option, a brilliant enabler at 5.7 million. Obviously the goal scorer in this Wolves team, guaranteed minutes, and over the next 6 game weeks they have some of the best fixtures, and Wolves are doing really well under Gary O'Neill. The only thing you need to note if you are buying Hwang is that he's on 4 yellow cards, 1 away from a 1-game ban, and that is a little bit of a concern over this festive period. That's the last thing that you want, is him getting yellow carded in Game Week 16 and missing in Game Week 17, but still a great enabler at 5.7 billion. Next up, Mbeumo went off injured. You probably know this already, but he has been ruled out for Game Week 16, Game Week 17. They blank in Game Week 18, and that alone is enough to be selling Bryan Mbeumo. At his price range, you just can't really afford to carry somebody like that in your FPL team. If he was maybe 4.5 million, you could bench him and wait till he comes back. But 7.1 million now, you just can't be carrying a player at that price point with so many brilliant midfielders available in the game. Number 3, Trent Alexander-Arnold was the man that we all should have owned. 40 points scored in the last 4 game weeks. He's been on absolute fire, really kind of delivering the trend that we saw in years gone by. The only problem is 7.9 million is impossible to fit into our team structures. I know some FPL managers have had to rip up trees, make -8s, -12s to get him into their team. Don't think that should be the case. I think we have missed the amazing period for Liverpool. There's still a few good fixtures left, but I don't think there are great fixtures coming up and worth justify paying 7.9 million, even though he is delivering week in, week out right now. Number 4, this is massive for FPL managers. Areola ended up picking a wrist injury in training and missed West Ham's fixture in Game Week 15. Devastating for those that started him and didn't have a backup goalkeeper. We don't know the time frame right now. Hopefully we'll get some information today and I will let you know in a future video before the deadline. But if you do own him, you do need to be cautious that he could be missing Game Week 16 as well. And for all it's worth, Fabianski did have a good game for West Ham last night. Next up, this is a big one. Lascelles went off in the Newcastle game. He was limping off the pitch. Again, we don't know if that is actually an injury or a precaution, but with Newcastle's games coming thick and fast, I would be concerned about Lascelles starting on the weekend. So just have that as a note. We will need to keep an eye on that in the press conferences today. And also Son, for those that watched the game, he went off limping. He was really in discomfort on the bench. There's been quotes after the game where he said he's hoping to be fit, but there's a lot of people saying that he was in a lot of discomfort. So Son's another one that could be a massive doubt for the weekend, and hopefully we'll get an update from Ange. Should we be selling him? I think that's probably rushing to conclusions right now, especially with the Mbeumo situation, but definitely one to consider right now if we do get some bad news on Son. Number 6, Pedro Porro conceded 2, but got an assist, 0.63 expected goal involvement, and 2 bonus points. Honestly, he should be right up there as the number 1 defensive transfer for your FPL teams. If you're a manager right now, similar to myself, who has a lot of centre-backs in his team, like a Saliba, who's 5.5, I feel like the Saliba to Pedro Porro move is just a transfer that's eventually going to happen. And I think getting it done sooner rather than later is probably the right move, especially when he's putting in performances like this. He was the main man in that Spurs team. Last few things, Leon Bailey, only 5.5 million. He's got 2 goals in his last 2 league games. And for anybody that watched that game against Man City, he was unbelievable. And he's actually taken the place of Diaby. Now, at 5.5 million, I think he's a great enabler. And it's worth noting, Villa have an amazing fixture in game week 18 at home against Sheffield United, which is, of course, a blank game week. My only concern is that I feel like Bailey could come out at any time for Diaby or early substitutions if this purple patch starts to end for him. A lot of the in the know say that he is right now Unai Emery's man and he's going to start, but I would be a little bit cautious as a long-term transfer. But I like him for the next 4 game weeks if you are looking short-term. And last up, Matty Cash benched once again, and this time was an unused sub. One narrative will say he's going to be fresh for the Arsenal game. For me, Ezri Konsa was phenomenal in that game alongside the other defenders. I'll be surprised if Matty Cash comes back in. If you own him, I think it's a sell. Even if he does start against Arsenal, I don't think we're expecting much from a clean sheet perspective. So I think Matty Cash, if you didn't know already, is a definite sell for your FPL teams. Right, those are the things you missed. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else that I should have added to this list. Without further ado, let's get into my Game Week 16 team reveal. Okay, so for a bit of context, I haven't actually made a transfer yet, but I'm pretty certain of what I am going to do. I want to wait for the Friday press conferences to actually get full information before making my decisions. And I have 1 free transfer and 1 million in the bank. So I have a little bit of a buffer where I can go to different players if I want to, just because of that cash. But one player that I'm not going to sell is going to be Dubravka. Obviously, I bought him in game week 15. I apologise for breaking the Newcastle defence. It was my fault for bringing him in. Look, with the Areola injury, away against Fulham isn't an option now. So I'm definitely going to have to start Dubravka, which isn't ideal because I thought Newcastle looked really tired in that game. And as I discussed, eventually the focus is going to have to come down to that Champions League home game against AC Milan. So maybe these league games are going to become a bit of a distraction for them with that game because no questions asked, AC Milan at home is their biggest game over the next few game weeks regardless. So Dubravka will start away against Spurs, but I am not expecting a clean sheet at all, especially if Lascelles is ruled out. I don't know who they're going to play at centre-back, but it could be a bit of a concern for those that are looking to double up on the Newcastle defence, but definitely not selling Dubravka this week. Now, speaking about managers that are starting Newcastle double defence, I'm looking like I could be one of those this weekend. I was really surprised Livramento started midweek against Everton because I felt the Tottenham game was a bit more of an importance for Eddie Howe. But the big problem with Newcastle, as I discussed, is on Wednesday they have this home game against AC Milan. So he may just look at this Spurs game and think, I need my top team for that Wednesday game because that is the main priority right now. They cannot go in with a second string team against AC Milan and just sacrifice the Champions League. They know they need to win that game. So I'm really concerned about Newcastle players going into this weekend. It is worth noting. I just think there's going to be such an emphasis on that game, which will be 3 days later. So double Newcastle defence right now against this Spurs attack. Don't feel too confident about that as we speak. And also, double Arsenal defence. I'm going into this week with Gabriel and Saliba away against Aston Villa. Now, it's worth noting, if I was to own a double defence away against Aston Villa, Arsenal would be my number 1 pick. I know they were poor against Luton defensively, but I would back them. If any team had to keep a clean sheet, it would be these. I think they have the tools available in this team to actually combat the Aston Villa team. My only concern is that Zinchenko at left back could get easily exposed against any of the forward that they have in Diaby or in Bailey. So I think that's the real weak point. But Saliba and Gabriel, I think physically can withstand themselves against the Watkins and all those lot. And I also think the likes of Rice can compete with the Douglas Luiz and the McGinns in that midfield. So I actually really fancy Arsenal to get a result here. And maybe going double Arsenal while others are selling them is actually going to be a differential in itself. Maybe this is one game too far for Aston Villa, but they are on an unbelievable home form. But it has to end at some point. I would love to bring in Pedro Porro, and it definitely is a consideration for my FPL team, doing Saliba to Pedro Porro against that tired Newcastle team. Obviously, Spurs weren't up to much themselves, but I think Pedro Porro is a player I want to bring in regardless. So maybe just doing it this week and accepting I'm going to have loads of Newcastle players against my Spurs players and just let this game week be what it'll be. That is a temptation, but it's not my number one transfer for my team. So moving into the midfield, and you can see here, Anthony Gordon is my planned transfer. I've got that at the bottom of the screen. My planned game week transfer is going to be Bryan Mbeumo to Anthony Gordon. Now again, this is not ideal for my team because as you can see, I'll be doing double Newcastle defence, Gordon, and I'll be having Son as well. So I have problems in this team where I have a lot of players playing against one another, and going triple Newcastle off the back of that Everton game just doesn't really feel right. However, sometimes in FPL you need to make transfers which aren't necessarily short-term, they are more long-term moves. Now with someone like Anthony Gordon, I expect him to play most minutes over the next 5 or 6 game weeks, especially if Harvey Barnes continues to be out of this Newcastle team, so I know he is recovering from a long-term injury. With Gordon, and I'll put the fixtures up right now, I'm looking at this as more of a long-term move. Yes, this week is almost one of those that I'm just going to discard because I honestly think Newcastle are going to struggle. As I said, their minds are going to be on this Champions League game. But then Fulham at home in game week 17, Luton away in game week 18. Remember, that's a blank game week, so you want the best players for that week. And then Nottingham Forest at home in game week 19. Beyond that, he might be a transfer out. But for the next 4 game weeks, I think he's one of the best around. Now, of course, as an Mbeumo replacement, I already have Cole Palmer, and I think he's a great option for the next few game weeks. So I'm happy already that I have Cole Palmer. Hwang is a great consideration, but with the yellow card 1 away from suspension, I am concerned about buying him. So he's off the table for my own personal team. And someone like a Phil Foden just doesn't really make sense because he is a little bit of a problem in terms of minutes guaranteed. I know he started 11 of the last 12, but I would be concerned about Phil Foden. And he blanks in game week 18. So I'm just putting a problem onto another problem with my team. And Gordon ticks a lot of the boxes. Now, the one player that I definitely want to own and go straight back to is going to be Jarrod Bowen. However, he is a little bit more expensive. Yes, I have the funds available with 1 million in the bank, but spoiler alert, I am one of those managers that still owns Darwin Núñez, and I definitely want Ollie Watkins back by game week 18. And if I was to do the Mbeumo to Bowen move, it means that I'm kind of blocking myself off doing the Darwin Núñez to Watkins move later down the line. I've looked at the team in the future, and it is going to cause me a few problems because with this squad, I anticipate that I want to either own Reece James or Pedro Porro in defence later down the line. So let's say Saliba goes to one of those. That isn't going to free up any cash from my team. And I start to look at my team and think, where is the sacrifice going to be in terms of funds in order to me upgrading Darwin Núñez to Ollie Watkins? So the Gordon move kind of helps with that. It means I can afford Watkins later down the line. He's 6 million, he's great value, and Newcastle's fixtures long-term are great. So even though I would love Jarrod Bowen, and I would say to you lot listening, if you can afford him, I do think he is the best Mbeumo replacement. For my own personal team, I think it just makes sense to get Gordon in and accept that it is going to be a horrid game week 16. Outside of that, the only other concern for my midfield is going to be Son at home against Newcastle. As I discussed, he went off limping. This could be a concern if the Friday press conferences suggest he could be out. If he is out for game week 16, we need to look at the fixtures and say, is he worth selling? Game week 17, which is a week afterwards, he is away against Nottingham Forest, one of the best fixtures. Then he's at home against Everton, not a bad fixture. And then away against Brighton, followed by Bournemouth. The fixtures are fantastic for Son, and it will require a lot for me to be selling him. I think if he's just ruled out for game week 16, I'll just take it on the chin and probably keep him, knowing that game week 17 onwards is fantastic for Son. So the midfield is looking how it is, and I am planning on doing Mbeumo to Gordon. Moving into the forwards, yes, Erling Haaland is of course in the team, and he is obviously going to be starting away against Luton. Don't need to talk about that one there. The big one is going to be Darwin Núñez. Now, of course, those that bought Darwin Núñez, we got one up on Ollie Watkins last game week, even if it was for only 2 points. Definitely didn't pay back the torture that we had in game week 14. So Darwin Núñez, as we discussed on this channel, was always going to be a minimum 3 game week move, and I'm hoping he can deliver my loyalty with this away game against Crystal Palace. I expect him to start, as he was obviously benched in game week 15, so I'm hopeful of some decent minutes in game week 16. And I'm not really desperate to sell him, I can't lie. I have other problems in my team. I don't think Ollie Watkins is a desperate move in this week against Arsenal, especially when I have double Arsenal defence. Alvarez could come in, but I just don't really want to be bringing in a player that blanks in game week 18, especially when I've kind of confirmed I won't be free hitting in game week 18. It would be very much a sideways move to then sell him again in game week 18. So Darwin Núñez stays in the team. And as I said, he's almost a placeholder for Ollie Watkins in game week 18. So that's the team right now. Let's cover captaincy and then we'll kind of wrap up my team. So captaincy is probably a bit more interesting than what we thought it would have been a week ago. Haaland away against Luton seems like the most obvious captaincy ever, but of course we've seen Luton do a job on all of these big teams that's visited them. We've seen Arsenal get a last minute winner, we saw Luton hold Liverpool to a draw. Could Man City be the one to break the hoodoo a little bit and beat them by a comfortable margin? I think it's only a matter of time. We need to remember, Luton still conceded 4 goals against Arsenal. I think Man City are one of the best in the business at just completely controlling games. Aston Villa obviously was a bit of an anomaly because they dominated them, but Rodri's going to be back. John Stones will likely partner Rodri in the midfield. And straight away, I think there is control in that team. Whereas Arsenal had difficulty with the set pieces, I think Man City have the players available to them to actually defend these set pieces. Now, in terms of an attacking potential, I know it's a narrative where we think Pep's going to fire a rocket up their ass, but I do think that is going to be the case. I think Erling Haaland could have a field day against this Luton team. I think it might be one game too far for Luton against Man City, and I'm expecting a comfortable City victory. The only way I would take the captaincy off Erling Haaland is if Pep said something in his press conference that suggested Haaland needed a rest. And if that was the case, I probably would put the captaincy on Mo Salah. But right now, I am more than happy putting it on Erling Haaland. So, look, that is how the team is looking. Right now, the plan is to do Mbeumo to Gordon. It makes sense for my team, knowing that I need the funds later down the line to bring in Ollie Watkins and also have that defensive transfer available in Saliba to Pedro Porro. Now, I could, with this game week, actually take a -4, do the Arsenal move slightly earlier, do Saliba to Pedro Porro and get myself a Spurs defender. The only issue with it, I don't really back them for a clean sheet against this Newcastle team, even though I am expecting a Spurs win against a tired Newcastle team. It doesn't feel the right time to bring in a Spurs defender defensively. So I think I'm going to do a free transfer, knowing that in game week 17, I can then potentially make a move for Pedro Porro or Reece James after one more game week's worth of information. It's very difficult on these game weeks where it's the 3rd game in a week because tired legs, rotation can happen. And I feel like taking a -4 is just a bit of a risk for my FPL team. So this is how I'm likely going to look. I will be doing a deadline live, of course, so make sure you are subscribed. But this is probably how I'm going to finish. Yes, guys, okay, that is going to wrap up today's Game Week 16 team reveal video. Thank you so much for all tuning in, all the love that you've given me over the last few weeks on FPL. I do massively appreciate it. As always, if you are new around here and you want to get involved, please do consider smash that subscribe button and dropping a like on the video. I will be doing a Game Week 16 deadline live around 9 AM UK time, so make sure you do check that out and get your questions answered in the chat. Have an amazing day, and I will see you very soon. Take care. Cheers.